A poor girl married a millionaire for convenience, only to learn the wedding was never meant to be fake. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Emma Collins was an ordinary young woman, living in a small apartment in a bustling city. She worked as a waitress at a local diner, barely scraping by to pay her rent and cover her basic expenses. Her life was a routine of long hours, tired feet, and dreams that seemed far out of reach. Tyler Preston, on the other hand, was a name known in the high society circles. He was the CEO of a booming tech company, with a fortune that could rival the GDP of small nations. His life was filled with luxury, designer suits, private jets, and lavish parties. But despite all his wealth and success, Tyler had his own struggles. His family, particularly his mother, was pressuring him to settle down and marry someone from a prestigious background, someone who could carry on the family legacy. But Tyler had no interest in those kinds of relationships. He wanted to avoid the pressure of an arranged marriage, but he also didn't want to disappoint his family. That's when the idea struck him, a marriage of convenience. He didn't need love. He needed a contract, someone to meet the family's expectations without actually being in a real relationship. He didn't expect it to be complicated, at least not at first. He met Emma through a mutual acquaintance who knew about her financial troubles. Tyler saw her as the perfect candidate, someone with no strings attached, someone who wouldn't care about the public eye or the wealth. A simple arrangement. In exchange for a generous sum of money, Emma would pretend to be his wife. It was a win-win situation. Emma, desperate to escape the crushing weight of debt and her lackluster life, agreed. She wasn't looking for love, just a way out of the mess she found herself in. She never expected that this fake marriage might turn into something more. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. They attended family gatherings, posed for photos, and even shared a few awkward moments together. Emma kept reminding herself it was just a contract, nothing more, nothing less. But Tyler's attention toward her, his charm, and the way he made her feel like she mattered, started to blur the lines. The more time they spent together, the harder it became for Emma to ignore the strange fluttering in her chest. Little did she know, Tyler was starting to feel the same way. What began as a convenient arrangement was about to turn into something neither of them expected. Emma's life had always been one of struggle, but she never imagined it would lead her to this moment. Sitting in a luxurious penthouse apartment, sipping champagne with a man she barely knew, all in the name of a contract. The terms of the arrangement had been clear from the start. No love, no complications, just a business deal. She was to be Tyler's fake wife for a year, and in return, her financial troubles would be gone. But as she looked around Tyler's modern, minimalist apartment, something started to change inside her. She wasn't supposed to care about this. She wasn't supposed to feel anything for him. But there it was, a fluttering in her chest, a feeling that she couldn't ignore. Tyler, on the other hand, seemed to be just as composed as he had been when the deal was first made. He greeted her with that same confident smile, one that charmed everyone he met, yet there was a certain warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It was a small gesture, but Emma couldn't help but notice. "You look great tonight," Tyler said casually as they sat down at the table for their first official dinner together. Emma forced a smile, trying to mask the nervousness creeping in. "Thanks," she replied, trying to maintain the distance she had promised herself she would keep. The evening continued with small talk and polite exchanges, the kind of conversations you'd expect from two strangers trying to act like a married couple. But as the night wore on, Emma began to feel something shift. Tyler wasn't just pretending to care. He was paying attention, noticing things about her that no one ever had before. He asked her about her past, about the things she liked, the things she wanted. It wasn't just about the marriage contract anymore. Emma found herself laughing at his jokes, enjoying his company more than she should have. She tried to remind herself that this wasn't real, that she was just playing a part in a well-rehearsed charade. But every time Tyler looked at her with that genuine smile, it became harder to separate the fake from the real. By the end of the evening, as she was leaving his apartment, Emma realized she had started to look forward to the next time they would meet. That terrified her. She had come into this arrangement knowing exactly what it was, a business deal, nothing more. But now, as she stood outside the building, she couldn't deny that something was changing. The line between what was real and what was fake had blurred, and Emma didn't know what to make of it. Was she really starting to fall for him, or was this just part of the act? The next few days were a blur of business meetings, social gatherings, and public appearances. Tyler and Emma's relationship was being carefully curated for the media, and Emma played her part flawlessly. But behind the scenes, things were starting to get complicated. Tyler's gestures, his small acts of kindness, seemed to go beyond the scope of their arrangement. He brought her coffee when she had a late night at the office, remembered the little details about her life that she had shared in passing, and showed up at her apartment just to check in on her. It was clear to Emma that Tyler wasn't just fulfilling a contract. He was starting to care, and that scared her more than anything. She had to remind herself constantly that this was a deal. There was no room for feelings, no room for love. But every time she saw him, the lines between what was real and what was fake grew even more blurred. And Emma couldn't decide if she was ready to face the truth of what was happening between them. The days continued to pass, each one blending into the next. Emma found herself becoming more and more entwined in a world that Tyler had introduced her to. At first, it was easy to maintain the distance she had promised herself. She was there for the contract, not for anything else. But as time went on, the boundaries she had set began to fade. Tyler's presence, his kindness, and his attention to detail became harder to ignore. He wasn't just a man who was fulfilling a business deal. He was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing. And that terrified her. She had never intended to get attached to him. He was a millionaire, a man who could have anyone he wanted. And she was just a waitress, someone who had been struggling to get by. But despite everything, she couldn't deny the way he made her feel. He was always there for her, whether it was a simple check-in after a long day or an unexpected visit to bring her favorite snacks. She began to notice the small things he did, the gestures that spoke volumes. He would call her just to hear her voice, ask how her day was going, and remember little details about her life that she never thought anyone would care to remember. Emma had to admit, she was starting to look forward to those moments. It was becoming harder to pretend that their arrangement was nothing more than a business deal. Every time she saw him, the lines between what was real and what was fake grew more and more blurred. Tyler, for his part, seemed to be enjoying these moments as well. He had always been the confident, charming businessman who could win anyone over with his smile, but with Emma, there was something different. She wasn't like the women he usually dated, the ones who were more interested in his wealth and status than in him as a person. Emma didn't care about his money, at least not in the way others did. She was kind, genuine, and unpretentious. He had grown to appreciate her honesty and the way she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. It was refreshing, and he found himself drawn to her more and more. The moments they shared, however brief, had started to mean more to him than he had anticipated. But he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. This was a marriage of convenience, a contract between two people who didn't need love, or so they had both agreed. Yet with every passing day, Tyler found it harder to reconcile his feelings for Emma with the deal they had made. He knew he couldn't offer her the kind of relationship she deserved, not while they were living in a lie. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if what he was feeling was real. Was he falling for her? And if he was, what did that mean for their arrangement? Emma, meanwhile, was starting to notice the shift in her own feelings. She had entered this situation with clear boundaries, yet those boundaries were becoming harder and harder to maintain. She couldn't explain it, but something about Tyler made her feel special. He was attentive, thoughtful, and, surprisingly, vulnerable at times. She had never seen this side of him before. The man who had once seemed so untouchable, so perfect in his wealth and status, was now someone she was beginning to care for. It was all too much for Emma to process. She had come into this marriage thinking she would be safe from the dangers of love, but now she wasn't so sure anymore. Every day felt like she was on the edge of something she couldn't control. She didn't want to fall for him. She couldn't afford to. But the more time they spent together, the more she realized that maybe it was already too late. Emma tried to push her feelings aside. She kept reminding herself that this was just a deal, a temporary arrangement, and nothing more. But it was becoming harder to ignore the way her heart raced when Tyler smiled at her, or how the sound of his voice seemed to fill a void she didn't even know existed. She was getting too comfortable in his world, too attached to his kindness, and she didn't know how to pull herself back. It had been a few weeks since their first dinner together, and their interactions had only become more frequent. There were now phone calls late into the night, small gifts, and thoughtful gestures. Tyler was never overt with his affection, but it was there, in the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel like she mattered. Emma felt conflicted. On the one hand, she knew that she shouldn't be letting herself get attached to him. He was a millionaire, someone who could have anyone he wanted. She was just a waitress, someone who had never imagined a life like his. She had no place in his world, and yet, every time he reached out to her, she found herself wanting more. She couldn't deny the way he made her feel special. On the other hand, she knew that the closer she got to Tyler, the more difficult it would be to keep up the pretense of their marriage. The boundaries she had set were starting to blur, and the line between what was real and what was fake seemed impossible to distinguish. Tyler's affection wasn't just a part of the act. She could see that now. He was genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, and her past. Emma had never been the type to share her life with anyone, but with him, it felt different. He made her feel heard, valued in a way she had never experienced before. Yet, this only made her more anxious. What if he discovered the truth about her? What if he found out that she was only here for the money, that she had never expected to fall for him? She didn't want to face that possibility. She had spent most of her life hiding her emotions, keeping her distance from people who could hurt her. But Tyler wasn't like anyone else. He wasn't just looking for a pretty face to stand by his side. He was looking for someone real. That thought made Emma pause. Tyler wasn't like the men she had known in her life, men who only cared about what they could get from her. Tyler didn't want to change her, didn't want to use her. He just wanted to know her, to spend time with her. She realized that the fear she had of getting too close to him wasn't because of who he was, but because of who she was. She was scared of letting someone in, of letting herself feel something real. It wasn't long before that fear began to surface. One evening, as they were sitting on the balcony of Tyler's apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Emma felt a wave of doubt wash over her. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was something heavy in the air, something unspoken. Tyler turned to her, his expression serious. "Emma, I need to know something," he said quietly. "Is this what you want? All of this? Or are you just going along with it because it's easy?" Emma felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected him to ask that. She had been trying so hard to keep up the facade, to pretend that she wasn't starting to care about him. But now, with the way he was looking at her, she knew she couldn't keep lying. The truth was, she was scared. She was scared of what would happen if she let herself fall for him. She was scared of what he might think if he found out she had no real reason to be here other than the money. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. "I'm not just going along with it," she said softly. "I'm here because I want to be. But I can't pretend this is just a business arrangement anymore." Tyler's eyes softened. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm not pretending either." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Emma didn't know what to say next. All she knew was that everything was changing, and she didn't know if she was ready for it. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions for Emma. She had never expected to feel so uncertain, especially after what she had just admitted to Tyler. The moment they shared on the balcony had felt like a turning point, but now she wasn't sure where things stood. Tyler had looked at her with such intensity when he said he wasn't pretending either. There was something in his gaze that made her heart race, but it also filled her with dread. She had never been good at letting people in, and now she was facing the reality of her own feelings. She tried to go about her days as usual, but nothing felt the same. Her work at the diner was the same, The endless rush of customers, the clinking of dishes, the familiar hum of the kitchen. But her mind kept drifting back to Tyler. Was she falling for him? And if so, what did that mean? She had made a deal with him, a clear-cut arrangement with no room for emotions. But now, with every conversation, every shared laugh, and every lingering glance, she felt like she was losing control. Emma had spent years keeping her emotions locked away, building walls around herself to avoid getting hurt. She had never been one to trust easily, and now, she wasn't sure she could trust herself. Tyler was different from the men she had known in the past. He didn't want something from her. He just seemed to want her, and that terrified her more than anything. She didn't know how to navigate the growing feelings between them. She had never been taught how to handle love. As much as she wanted to push him away, she couldn't deny the connection they shared. It wasn't just the way he treated her, though that was part of it. It was the way he saw her. Not as a waitress, not as someone who needed saving, but as Emma. It was the little things he did, remembering her favorite coffee order, sending her texts just to check in, the way he made her feel like she was worth more than just a contract. She had never experienced this before. Emma spent the night lying awake, her thoughts racing. She had to be honest with herself. She was scared of what might happen if she let herself feel more for Tyler. Scared of what would happen if he learned the truth, that she had entered this marriage for convenience, for money, with no expectations of love. But now, she wasn't so sure if she could keep pretending. The weight of it all felt like too much to bear. The next time she saw Tyler, she knew she would have to face it. The tension between them had been building for weeks, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She couldn't keep hiding behind the walls she had built. She had to decide if she was ready to let herself feel, to let herself be vulnerable, or if she would continue to protect herself by keeping him at a distance. The choice seemed impossible, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay in limbo forever. When they met the next day for lunch, Tyler was as calm and collected as ever. He asked her how she was doing, but this time there was something different in his tone. It was softer, more sincere. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then, almost without thinking, she let slip. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler stopped what he was doing, looking up at her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Doing what?" he asked gently. "This. All of this," she said, motioning between them. "Pretending it's just a deal. Pretending I don't care. I can't keep pretending." Tyler's eyes softened. "Emma," he reached out and placed a hand on hers, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "You don't have to pretend. You never did." For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to believe that. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that everything wasn't as complicated as she had thought. Emma had never imagined that a simple agreement could turn into something so complicated. Sitting at the table across from Tyler, her thoughts were racing. The words he had said to her earlier, "You don't have to pretend," echoed in her mind. She had tried to bury her feelings, to stick to the plan, but everything was changing. Tyler had been a stranger when this whole arrangement began, just a man offering a way out of her financial struggles. But now, he was becoming so much more than that. She found herself wanting to share her dreams, her fears, her past, things she never thought she would tell anyone, especially not a man like him. But Tyler wasn't just any man. He wasn't like the others who only cared about what they could get from her. No, Tyler cared about who she was. That realization hit her hard, and it terrified her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of vulnerability. But what scared her more was the thought of walking away from him. The idea of returning to the life she had before, the life that felt so small and confined, made her stomach churn. She had never been in a relationship before where emotions were so complicated, where things weren't just black and white. She had always been cautious, never letting anyone get too close. But Tyler had broken through her walls, bit by bit, until she was no longer sure where she ended and where he began. As she sat there, in the quiet of his penthouse, she could feel the weight of their unspoken words. She could feel the tension building between them, the question that neither of them seemed ready to ask. "What now?" Tyler looked at her, his eyes soft but filled with something she couldn't quite name. Emma, he said, his voice low, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I need to know where we stand. We can't keep pretending forever. Either we commit to this, or we don't. His words hung in the air, and Emma felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had known this conversation was coming, but she wasn't prepared for it. She had never been the kind of person to jump into something head first, especially not with someone like Tyler. He was everything she had never expected, everything she thought she couldn't have. But now, she wasn't so sure. The connection between them was undeniable, the chemistry palpable, but was it enough to build something real? Was it enough to risk everything she had been trying to protect for so long? She didn't know the answer. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick with possibility. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, she admitted, her words spilling out before she could stop them. I've never been good at this. I don't know how to open up. I don't know how to trust. Tyler's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You don't have to know everything right now, he said gently. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for a chance for us to figure this out together. Emma looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, it was worth taking the risk. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I want to try. I want to see where this goes. Tyler's smile was slow and genuine, and for the first time since their agreement had started, Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe this was the beginning of something real. Maybe they could make it work. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Emma's mind was a whirlwind in the days that followed their conversation. She had agreed to try, but deep down she was still unsure. The weight of her emotions, the depth of her connection with Tyler, was something she had never prepared for. She had spent so long keeping her heart closed, protecting herself from the risks of getting hurt, and now she was faced with the reality that letting someone in wasn't as easy as she had hoped. Tyler was everything she had told herself she didn't need, yet everything she wanted. He was patient, caring, and understanding in ways that were foreign to her. Every time he smiled at her, every time he held her hand, she could feel the walls she had built around her heart slowly crumbling. But with every inch of progress, doubt crept in. She had never been in a relationship where love wasn't just a word. She had always seen it as something fleeting, something that people said just to make themselves feel better. But with Tyler, it was different. The sincerity in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen and heard, made her question everything she had ever believed about love. As the days passed, their connection deepened. They spent more time together, and slowly, Emma found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't imagined possible. She shared her fears, her past, and even her dreams, things she had kept buried for so long. Tyler listened to her without judgment, without trying to fix things. He simply listened, and that was enough. She had never felt so understood. But despite the growing intimacy between them, Emma still struggled with the reality of their situation. She had agreed to this arrangement as a way out, not as a path to love. She had told herself that this was all temporary, that they were simply two people playing a role. But as time went on, the line between acting and reality blurred, and Emma couldn't ignore the growing feelings in her heart. Tyler was no longer just a man she had married for convenience. He had become someone she cared for deeply. She tried to convince herself that this was just a passing phase, that she would go back to her old life once the year was over. But the more time she spent with him, the more she realized that she didn't want to go back. She didn't want to walk away from him, from what they were building together. One evening, after a quiet dinner at his apartment, Tyler turned to her with a serious look in his eyes. Emma, I need to know something, he said, his voice steady but filled with something that made Emma's heart race. Where do we go from here? We've both said we want this, but I need to know you're not just doing this because you feel like you have to. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The question had been hanging in the air for weeks, and now it was finally out in the open. She had been avoiding it, but now she couldn't hide from it any longer. She met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not doing this because I have to," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm doing this because I want to, because I want to be with you." The words felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders, as if a barrier had been broken. She had been afraid to admit her feelings, but now, in the silence of his apartment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Tyler's eyes softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "Emma," he whispered, "you don't have to be afraid. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was standing on solid ground. She had spent so long running from love, from vulnerability, from the very idea of letting someone into her heart. But in that moment, with Tyler's hand in hers, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. Maybe this was the beginning of something real. And as she looked into his eyes, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she was missing. Weeks passed, and things between Emma and Tyler continued to evolve. It was no longer just about a contract. Their bond had deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. Every conversation felt more real, every touch more meaningful. They had reached a place where they were no longer pretending to be something they were not. What had started as a deal had slowly transformed into something that resembled a real relationship. But with that shift came new challenges. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was still walking on thin ice. She had agreed to this arrangement with no expectations of love, but now she had to face the truth. She had fallen for him. It was a terrifying realization, one she didn't know how to handle. She had never been in a relationship where love wasn't conditional, where it didn't come with strings attached. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself, keeping people at arm's length, but Tyler was different. He had shown her kindness, patience, and genuine care. And now, as much as she tried to convince herself otherwise, she couldn't imagine her life without him. Tyler, for his part, was also grappling with his own feelings. He had started this arrangement with the intention of keeping things simple. He hadn't expected to grow so attached to Emma. But the more time they spent together, the more he realized that what he felt for her was real. It wasn't just a passing infatuation or a temporary connection. He cared about her deeply. He admired her strength, her resilience, and the way she saw the world. He was no longer content with the idea of living a life where their relationship was just a contract. He wanted more. But there was one thing still standing between them, the reality of their situation. They had entered this arrangement under the assumption that it would be temporary, that when the year was over, they would go their separate ways. But now, with emotions involved, that didn't seem so simple anymore. Tyler had been thinking about this for days, weighing the options in his mind. He couldn't imagine just walking away from Emma when the year was up. He wanted to build a future with her, one that wasn't tied to a contract. But he also knew that he couldn't ask her to give up everything she had worked for just because of his feelings. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of his living room, Tyler decided it was time to have the conversation that had been looming over them both. "Emma," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I've been thinking about what comes next. We both know this was supposed to be a temporary thing, but the more time I spend with you, the more I realize I don't want it to end when a year is over." Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to respond. "Tyler," she said slowly, "I feel the same way, but I don't know what that means. I don't know if we can just throw away everything we've built, everything we've agreed on." Tyler took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm not asking you to throw anything away. I'm asking you to think about the possibility of something real, something that isn't tied to a contract or a promise. Just us, together." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been afraid of letting go, afraid of opening herself up to someone completely. But with Tyler, it felt different. She had never felt so seen, so understood. And now, as she looked at him, she realized that maybe she was ready to take the leap into the unknown. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes." Tyler smiled, his expression soft and filled with affection. He didn't say anything at first, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. In that moment, Emma knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The following weeks were filled with a quiet sense of certainty that neither Emma nor Tyler had expected. It wasn't the whirlwind of emotion they had both feared, nor was it the calculated arrangement that had once defined their relationship. Instead, it was something grounded, steady, and, most surprisingly, simple. They spent time together not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. Every day felt more natural than the last. The awkwardness that had once clouded their interactions melted away, replaced by an ease that neither of them could have anticipated. They shared meals, took long walks through the city, and spent quiet evenings talking about everything and nothing at all. They no longer had to pretend that they were just playing a part. Tyler had stopped seeing her as a contract partner, and Emma had stopped seeing him as a man she could never truly have. They were just two people who had found something real, something deeper than either of them had thought possible. It was during one of those quiet evenings, sitting side by side on the couch, that Tyler spoke again. "Emma, I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice low but steady. She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sensing the weight in his tone. Tyler paused, taking a deep breath as if he were choosing his words carefully. "I know we've talked about this before, but I want to make sure we're both on the same page. What we're building here, it's not just a temporary thing, is it? I don't want to walk away from you after this year. I don't want to lose what we have." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with sincerity. Emma's heart swelled at the depth of his feelings. She had never expected to hear him say those words. Not in the way he said them, so openly, so honestly. Her mind raced as she thought about everything they had been through, everything they had shared. Could she really see herself with him in the long term? The answer was clearer than she had ever imagined. "No," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't want to walk away from this either. I don't want to lose you." Tyler smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made Emma's chest tighten. It was the kind of smile that made everything feel right. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "We take it one day at a time," he replied, his tone full of calm assurance. "We don't have all the answers, but we don't need them right now. All that matters is that we're together." In that moment, Emma realized that she had spent so much of her life searching for certainty, for a roadmap to the future. But the truth was, life wasn't about having all the answers. It was about living in the moment, trusting the journey, and letting herself embrace what she had with Tyler. They didn't have to have everything figured out. They just had to be willing to take the next step together. Emma smiled back at him, a sense of peace washing over her. She was ready to move forward, ready to build a future with him, and ready to let go of the past. She had once thought love was something she couldn't afford. But now, with Tyler beside her, she realized that it wasn't about money or security. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she had everything she needed, not because her life was perfect, but because she wasn't facing it alone. As they sat there, side by side, Emma knew that this was only the beginning of something beautiful. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to let herself believe in the future they could build together.